For over half a century, humans have endeavored to make business a force for good. But is the movement working? Or is it time to explore a new path forward? Welcome to Less Talk, More Action. We are your hosts, Joel Caesar and Owen Barrett, experts in clean energy, net zero real estate, decarbonization, and entrepreneurship. In each episode, we ask provocative questions and share stories from the front lines of sustainability with leaders in science, tech, and business taking real action to design a cleaner, better future. Thanks for joining the conversation. Now, let's get to work. Welcome to the Less Talk, More Action podcast. My name is Joel Caesar, the world's undisputed voice of building decarbonization. Joining me as always is Owen Barrett, the self-proclaimed Adam Newman of Green Building. Today's guest is Thomas Stanchak, Managing Director of Sustainability at Stoneweg US, where he leads US ESG strategy and implementation across a growing national portfolio of multifamily properties. Super smart guy, super knowledgeable about real estate. As we knew going in, I didn't know you had a relationship, or at least maybe had been trying to pitch him your solution, which makes sense that he's running multifamily. But I learned a lot. I think our guests are going to learn a lot, and I loved how his journey to ESG, I think we probably need more of in this space.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're interested in sustainability within real estate, Thomas is definitely a guy that you got to pay attention to. And I think part of the reason he's been so successful in his role is because he doesn't come from the ESG world. He comes from the asset management world. He really understands the fundamentals of real estate and then is able to kind of apply that to the decarbonization space.
Yeah, no doubt. Great guest. So thank you, Thomas. But before we get into the conversation with Thomas, let's dive into a segment we're calling Making a Bet. So I'm going to tee up a question, and you and I are going to make predictions about the future. So again, inspired by our friends at the All In podcast, gamblers at heart, and not afraid to share their predictions with the world, right or wrong, but at least going to take a stance based on the data that's on the field at the moment. So in this case, I'm going to ask you, we talk a lot about it on this show. Even in this episode, we will get into it with Thomas about city and or state building performance standards or building performance energy standards, often referred to as BIPs. And this is where cities will have a carbon emission threshold applied to commercial real estate of a certain size. And over the next decade, they'll be phasing the enforcement of these regulations and start to fine buildings and building owners if their annual carbon emissions exceed what their threshold has mandated. And so, look, we should do a better job of being accurate here, but we know there's BIPs in Denver, Seattle, New York City is probably the most famous one, Local Law 97. There's Boston, there's Cambridge, I think DC. I think I heard one, St. Louis is popping up recently. There's probably more we're missing, but big cities, big markets, really important for commercial real estate and having a huge impact on building owners and how they make decisions. And for guys like us, people like us working in climate tech, trying to get our solutions deployed and trying to find reasons that owners would get off the sidelines and deploy them. Oftentimes the risk, the threat of being fined by a BIPS is something that is a tool we might use, at least to start a conversation. So all that to be said, I want to ask you, let's make a bet. Do you think these cities, these BIPs, as written, as currently, like the way they've stated they're going to start enforce them over the next few years and by the end of the decade pretty substantially be fining buildings, do you think they stay in place as is, or do cities roll them back?
0% they stay as is. I think we've already seen it with Denver. They're rolling theirs back. I think cities are going to cave to the pressures of real estate developers who I would say are whining more than trying to figure out how to actually manage these penalties. I think BIPs are kind of like the Donald Trump-esque style of negotiation where you come out loud with big threats and then you pull everything back at the last minute because you don't actually know what you're doing.
Wow. Interesting take. Donald Trump and BIPs.
Donald Trump and BIPs. I mean, look at tariffs. It's like tariffs. Tariffs and BIPs. Big parallel there.
I'm going to say, all right, I'm going to weigh in. I won't go 0%. And of course, this is not like this answer is not going to be a way we can like put it on Polymarket and have a real prediction. But I think it'll be nuanced. I definitely think a few cities, especially some of the big ones, are going to roll them back or at least restructure them to make them a little easier to comply with. Last year, I was at Block Power, and few people, Block Bauer, it's a New York City based decarb company. There was a lot of senior leadership there who was very involved in local 97 committees and how that would be rolling out and enforced, and part of the conversation with private building owners on ways it can be implemented efficiently so that everybody wins, right? I think everyone wants to see emissions go down and buildings be more efficient. But when we were there was a moment where our CEO sent an email out and was like, we need everyone to be writing emails to your city council people and advocating to these groups, because there was a vote where it was like 1 or 2 votes shy of probably being rolled back. And again, this is local law 97, like the BIPs in the market that everyone's pointing to as, look, New York City's doing it. And that almost got rolled back last year. And that continues to be a market where commercial real estate is not doing great. I think it's coming back. It's better than other markets because it's New York City, but still areas where it's not as thriving of a downtown as it wants to be. And the perspective of, well, since there's so many regulations, we can't invest in these buildings to bring in new tenants or do what traditionally we do to attract new market activity. I think you're right. There's going to be some strong lobbying, but I guess
can we agree too?
Said,
can we agree that any rollback of BIPs does a discredit to the whole industry, because then builders don't know how serious these things are and if they actually need to plan for them?
Yeah, I think that's a great
point.
So
I think as cities are rolling this out, they need to get the perspective of owners, what's actually possible. Because if they just put out these unrealistic goals and expectations, then they're going to roll them back, and then the industry isn't going to take them seriously.
Yeah, and I mean, you and I both know it's not simple. What's actually possible. We know there's ways they can be investing, but every building's different. Every ownership model is different, and so it's not simple for every building that must comply to invest in the right way to do it. That reaches no fines. All that to be said, though, let me just give a quick point. I was just at a conference this week, an IMN private funds event in Newport, Rhode Island, and there was a panel about multifamily. And it was a few pretty large private equity owners, billions assets under management, operate across the country. And there was a question asked by the moderator about building performance standards. And across the board, 60 of these people all have said, we avoid those markets. We're not investing there. We're not building there. We can't comply. And then they were all kind of making this joke about, like, isn't it funny that all these liberal cities that are complaining about lack of housing and the housing crisis and housing affordability enforce these regulations that make housing more expensive to build? So it's like, that was a very there's a point of view at that kind of conference, a private equity real estate conference. But I don't know. Are they wrong?
No, they're dead on. Like, that's the problem between the people actually doing the work and the people writing the laws. People writing the laws usually don't understand how anything gets done.
Well, interesting conversation. We'll be tracking it, of course. Your bet is 0% chance these be enforced as is. I'm going to say I agree to some extent. Most of them will probably be restructured, will be my bet.
What's the wager here? $100?
How about a new surfboard?
Oh,
you buy me a new surfboard, just like the one behind me.
All right.
Yeah. I think you owe me a surfboard. You probably broke one of mine in Santa Barbara. All right, but before we get into all of that, let's dive into our conversation with Thomas Stanchak. Joining us today is Thomas Stanchak, Managing Director of Sustainability at Stoneweg US, where he leads US strategy and implementation across a growing national portfolio of multifamily properties. With a background in real estate operations and a deep commitment to practical, on-the-ground sustainability, Thomas brings a unique hands-on perspective to the climate challenges and opportunities facing the built environment. He's passionate about closing the gap between ESG goals and what actually happens at the building level, and he's helping shape a future where sustainability is both impactful and achievable. So, Thomas, welcome to the Less Talk, More Action podcast.
Thank you, Owen and Joel, for the invitation. I really appreciate it. Happy to be here.
Very cool. Well, lots of ideas in that bio that we align with here on the podcast. But let's dive right in. We start our guests off with the same question. Thomas, how are you taking action to make the world a better place?
You gave me I think the hardest question to start with, and it's also supposed to be the softball, right? But, I tend to be a thoughtful person. And I really do think that people in roles such as mine really do have an opportunity to make the world a better place. But I don't want to kind of like make that sound like value signaling in the sense of working on issues around climate, sustainability, that sort of thing is inherently good. But I think that what I bring to it is, a rigor that's data driven. So I've had a lot of success with, getting a comprehensive understanding of the actual energy profile of our buildings. And then also putting that in the context of it's not just a matter of reducing or integration of renewables or that sort of thing, but I actually know what I need to do to meet kind of like, short-term, midterm, long-term goals, through algebra. I like math. And finally, the key piece is bringing financial and economic context to it. So, I think really what I do and how it's making an impact and hopefully will result in a better outcome is being able to kind of bring those things together where, the data kind of tells you where you need to be working and what you should be doing. And then what is the financial inputs and what value that has on, or what effect that has on values. So, I can kind of bring this to the boardroom, and that facilitates, the opportunity to kind of do a bottom-up approach.
Thomas, you and I know each other outside of the podcast in real life, which is always nice. For the listeners who don't know, Stoneweg is definitely one of the leaders in the ESG space within multifamily, the decarbonization space. How did you get your foot in the door with Stoneweg, and what was the ESG picture like before you joined? Because I know, you've been pretty loud and outspoken on social media about just what you're doing, the data, like you said. So maybe just bring us kind of up to speed about where Stoneweg was before you joined and where it is now.
So Stoneweg is a global group of real estate verticals. In the U.S., Patrick Richard founded Stoneweg US, which is kind of like the affiliate that covers U.S. investments. He did so technically in 2016, but opened an office, physical office, and that sort of thing in 2017. So I was the first employee. Started as an asset manager. So how did I get my foot in the door? Well, I helped build the door, build the office, spec the HVAC, because Patrick has an endearing quality that kind of aberrant background noise bothers him. And so I had to work with the HVAC mechanic to silence the air handler that was overhead in our office and get that right. So I started when the walls were still wet, and as the company grew, Patrick saw an opportunity for us in the board for Vara US, which is our biggest fund. It's publicly traded. Saw an opportunity to engage on kind of like aspects of ESG, and I was tasked with that. I make the joke, what did I do to deserve that? Give me the hardest problems in the world. But I really do take a sense of pride that, my personal experience and my personal talents, I think, have really created a platform, I think, that is, in terms of sustainability and climate issues and that sort of thing, makes our company competitive with the best.
That's a very interesting story, Thomas. I wasn't aware that's how you started. Owen and I, if you listen to the podcast, we've joked a few times on earlier episodes about sometimes selling to the sustainability lead creates more challenges than it should. And, in our career, we've both worked together selling solar. I sold decarbonization at a previous company that more implementation focused. And we've both seen success when you sell a decarb strategy that has an ROI value proposition to a non-sustainability asset manager who sees in black and white.
Yeah.
And sometimes you go to the sustainability leader and it turns into, maybe it gets a little more complicated, and they start worrying about, is it scope 1 or scope 2, and is this aligned with our global strategy? What's in my environmental report? So I guess teeing that up, question for you: do you find yourself better at pulling the trigger on decisions because of this unique entry into this position compared to others in your field?
Probably better. I think, my journey through my life, my career is pretty bottom up. So, I understand, I have a pretty intimate understanding of U.S. multifamily, and a good understanding of the mechanics and the design of the type of buildings that we invest in. And I've had a lot of personal experience with that. And, I'm very fortunate to have that experience and bring that into the context of being able to discriminate, worthwhile actions from not at a high level is pretty innate for me at this point. But I don't pull the trigger, sort of. I don't take that approach. I take a incremental approach. So, it's one thing, and it's a big success to get things like renewables, solar, for example, into the budget for a property, into the CapEx budget, either from due diligence for an acquisition, kind of getting it in the initial, or often through some other liquidity event, getting the funding for it. And then there's the process of scoping it and bidding it, and those results and those outcomes often sometimes can change the dynamics. So I can tell you that I am statistically as likely to advocate and approve and push forward on a solar investment as likely to kill it. So I don't do kind of solar at all costs. I make those investments, and here's why I say that is that for me to gain momentum and to expand on that, I need a track record of success. And so it's really important to me at every point that I examine what's happening and the financial dynamics and the economics of it, and make sure that what we're doing is creating a pipeline of investing in solar, for example, successfully, so I can expand that scope over time. It's about building credibility and a track record and gaining that trust where you do it more and more autonomously.
Yeah. As kind of a follow-up question to that, Thomas, we met at an ESG conference, and I was pretty surprised because at the conference you told me that you also brought your CEO, which I thought was fascinating, because I think so often, as Joel kind of alluded to, the ESG projects often get siloed within the ESG departments. And I've always advocated that, leadership has to be interested in these projects too, if we really want to scale adoption. Two-part question. How did you get your CEO to go to this ESG conference, and how can more ESG departments engage their leadership to come with them?
So I'm really fortunate in the fact that Patrick has been my advocate. So, in a practical sense, often, I'm the one that's tempering his expectation. Usually it's the other way around, because he has a lot more authority than I do in that sense. So, I'm really focused on getting things right, and I've made a lot of mistakes. So I know the importance of getting them right. But how did I get him there? I think that more and more, it's especially when you're raising capital, talking to equity, or even trying to navigate advantages in terms of lowering your cost of capital and debt and that sort of thing. There are conversations and incentives to be captured and conversations to be had on kind of things around ESG or sustainability. And I think that a lot of the folks that have a long track record in real estate investment sometimes are uncomfortable with those subjects. So, I made the point that the only way you're going to become comfortable speaking on those subjects with authority is through practice getting involved in talking to the people that, like yourself, is an expert on solar. That's those sorts of interactions are, nobody is born fully formed as an expert on these subjects. You need to have a lot of experience and learn from that experience. So that's, I think, what he hoped to gain from, that instance. But yeah, he's been involved in others, and he's certainly been, a big proponent of me being, communicating on subjects publicly and being involved in stuff like this, and kind of being able to bring an authentic and experienced voice to it. I think that, the principle that we're trying to demonstrate is that it's easy to say that you care about these things or you think that they're important. It's a whole nother thing to demonstrate why. And that's, for me, the big kind of differentiator is I'm not a doer as opposed to so much, I think, why am I doing this? And I think once you really sit down and really evaluate why you're doing certain things, it makes the doing so much easier. Or you can discriminate between what you're doing and what you shouldn't be doing.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Thomas, I have to ask, you and I don't know each other like Owen. I've followed you on LinkedIn. You come across as someone, and as you're describing here, who is analytical and focused on doing things the right way, data-driven, so you can develop track record to continue to expand. And it seems like I caught up on those things because we wouldn't invite every CRE sustainability lead to the podcast. Some Owen and I, if you listen to this, we oftentimes get annoyed by reporting season. So I'm going to ask you the annoying question. Your perspective on the industry and GRES been reporting, feel free to be frank and push back on us. But sometimes we think that there's too much time and resources committed to reporting when that could be provided or generated elsewhere.
Yeah. I think that largely, well, number one, I get paid to do a lot of this stuff and I'm the one driving it. So I want to continue to be paid. So I can't take down every framework, benchmark, and standard. But what I can say is that I think the problem globally with them is it's so much backward looking. Right now I'm doing our 4th annual ESG report for Varia. And it takes me about a month to author this document, and it's comprehensive and I'm really proud of it. And it's also, I think I gain from that experience. Everyone should have to sit down and account for everything they do in the previous year and really kind of like put it out in the public realm and open it up to scrutiny. And I think that's super helpful. The problem is human nature. People tend not to want to provide those criticisms, and I keep asking for them. Maybe I shouldn't ask for them here. Maybe I'll get them. Be careful what you ask for, right?
Yeah.
And but that's kind of like, I think that the backward-looking nature of it, the kind of the timeliness, where they call it climate transition and climate change. And all of those things are pointing towards the future. And really what you're trying to do as a real estate investor is figure out whether that change is going to affect how your investment is valued. So that's the function. None of that says look back 2 years. Like what it does say is that you need to look forward. And I think that there often is an approach to the public reporting, like, the ESG report writing I'm doing, or benchmarking, like with GRES and other kind of like global benchmarks. We also do CDP, which is formerly the Carbon Disclosure Project.
Yep.
Which is a whole nother level of torture if you're interested in that.
I had to do that at Google, which is
all right. So you know what I'm talking about.
Part of the reason I left.
Like Dante would have put this in this book, because it's hard, but it makes you really examine what you're doing. But also it's, again, a lot of it is backward looking. There's a benefit to that because you should be doing, like, what they say, gap analysis. You should be looking at where your not able to really kind of like demonstrate alignment, compliance, that sort of thing, and kind of fill those gaps. And I've gone through that process now. And in terms of sort of like, you know, the work at the beginning that's required when you're building a platform, you know, the policy writing and putting all that stuff, you know, it's a lot of talk and it's a lot of publishing, and like it's value signaling in a lot of ways, which, you know, is two-dimensional.
Do you have ideas? I've never, sorry to interrupt, but I've never heard this idea of trying to change reporting from backwards looking to forward looking. I think it's fascinating. Do you have ideas for what that would actually look like, or how you could incorporate it?
There are aspects to the existing reporting that is forward looking, but it's people become very kind of shy, coy,
Gun shy. Yeah.
They become like they vacillate, and part of it is just, you know, this is how people function. Making commitments and kind of like demonstrating, you know, the fact is that, you know, we have these, you know, the creme lines, famous, you know, decarbonization, smooth, really sharp lines that, you know, you're supposed to get this kind of year over year reduction in performance. And unfortunately, that's not the way buildings behave. You have probably the biggest factor is the biggest factor in kind of like building results in terms of energy is like heating and cooling, and then also, you know, hot water. But, you know, the weather has a big effect on that, you know, and we're having some of the kind of like a record kind of couple of years of really hot summers, and you can be modernizing your buildings, things like that. And, you know, your energy use is kind of flatlining. And, you know, the reality is if you look forward, heat stress is going to continue to rise in large parts across the country. And so you're going to kind of it's sort of a Sisyphusian task at hand. Yeah. Now, you know, you can chime in, Owen, and say, well, you know, you can integrate renewables. You know, so you won't be.
Joel yells at me when I pitch the business too much.
He's always on here selling his product to our podcast guests, which we told ourselves
I feel like
we weren't going to do.
It out, like I'm setting the ball on the tee.
I guess, you know, if you're asking for it, we can let him.
You can play caddy, Joel. You know.
Yeah.
But
it reminds me, Thomas, not to interrupt. I posted about this months ago. I won't name names. One of the big banks who left the coalition that was, I think it was called the Net Zero Alliance in banking, they left it, and then there was a report about how they're betting on investing in air conditioning stocks because they know as the world gets warmer, like we're going to need more air conditioning everywhere. It's like, well, that dichotomy is where we are as an industry.
You know, I would have to look at, you know, their analysis, but there is kind of like it's not only a warming world and, you know, an aging population that needs kind of this sort of regulation. It's really dangerous for infants and old people to get really hot.
Yeah.
Like it's uncomfortable for people like us, but can be lethal for people who are at the extremes.
And there's places that are like, obviously we're saying this, but like the UK didn't used to have summers that were so hot that they needed air conditioning everywhere. Now they do. I owned a small craftsman home in LA years ago that when it was built in the early 1900s didn't need cooling. It was pretty cool in LA, but now summers. So like you said, it is a necessity. So I think that big bank knows what they're doing. They know what they're investing in.
Thomas, I was going to say that, you know, Bill Gates's book on climate change, you know, he points to starting Microsoft in Albuquerque not needing air conditioning, and now you do.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a big change. I want to go back to something that you said about sometimes we as an industry have a hard time, you know, we're shy when it comes to forward-looking projections. Mm-hmm. And you're way more versed in the real estate world than Joel and I are, but I want to try and draw a parallel because I feel like the real estate side of companies doesn't have a hard time projecting, the forecasted IRR on a 5 or 10 year fund, or they don't have a hard time projecting how many units they want to go acquire over the next 5 or 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
But then the ESG department does have a hard time making commitments to what they want to go try and do.
Yeah.
How do we fix that? Because Joel and I are always, we are critical of our industry for being too timid. And I think we do need to kind of get a little bit more aggressive and a little bit bolder.
So I think that there needs to be just kind of real estate people in general are not energy savvy, energy economic is savvy, and they usually don't think in terms of kilowatts or BTUs or, emissions. I think that, addressing those things, which are kind of like, I think take up the most space in the ESG space and also are the hardest kind of subjects to tackle. It's making the unseen seen, because energy is flowing through everything around us right now, and it came from somewhere, a natural gas turbine, a solar panel, something is producing this. And, the biggest machine on the earth, the US electrical grid, is kind of like all around us. And we take these things for granted. And it's a material thing that's just largely invisible to everyone around us. We just kind of like assume, that it's an unlimited resource that has no limits. And the earth has limits, nature has limits, and it will adapt. So fundamentally, people, and a subset of people are real estate investors and operators, need to, understand, what a kilowatt hour is, how their investments, especially when you are doing it at like a nationwide or global scale, you begin to more and more understand the, energy is kind of like the essential unit of input for the economy. It's, and also what's happening in terms of, the transition to a low carbon economy and the impacts of technology on that. And, what I kind of hold on to is that, the energy economy of the last century, which is fossil fuels, and the world got wealthier and healthier and had enormous benefits from. I'm not an enemy of fossil fuels in any sense. What I am is sort of like an energy economic pragmatist. And there's a cost to that, and the cost is, becoming very apparent. It's something that is more and more being integrated into underwriting and valuations and that sort of thing. It's not happening fast enough, but it's happening. So it's being understood better and better by capital markets. And the kind of the physics of it is that the cost of producing energy through fossil fuels is going up. The capital cost, the human inputs, the variability of the resources itself, it's going up. And, the economics of renewables is getting faster and cheaper and easier, and faster and cheaper and easier year over year. And so at some point, I feel like the solution is kind of inherent in itself. Yeah. It's really, the problem is that are real estate investors going to be able to kind of like latch on to this and kind of understand the principles and integrate it into the way that they do business, or are they going to get a discount? Basically, they're going to have, they can project IRRs and rent growth and all sorts of things. But if you're assuming that energy is a fixed 3% annual incremental input forever, you're wrong. You're absolutely wrong.
It's going to change your NOI. Yeah. Well, Thomas, let's transition a bit. I know you've got a particular interest in biodiversity in real estate. I think it's a cool thing to think about. I'm curious about your perspective. So as a quick background, when I was at Google, I was on the RUSE team, Real Estate and Workplace Services, RUSE sustainability team. I was in charge of the global net zero program. One of my colleagues, a brilliant PhD, she was in charge of the ecology program for RUSE. Google's kind of famous for incorporating ecology both inside and outside of our buildings. And as we all struggled and battled inside this great company for resources to push our own programs forward, I saw how everyone loved supporting ecology. It's so innate in all of us. But we're a big corporate entity with different budget constraints than commercial real estate. So I'm curious your perspective on, we can all acknowledge qualitatively there's value in nature and biodiversity coming to your buildings, bringing it inside. But how is that conversation evolving from a commercial real estate practical standpoint?
I think that we've kind of I think the opportunity in terms of nature and biodiversity and that sort of thing is an escape from me not thinking about energy and how complicated and difficult and expensive kind of the whole thing can be. Where I think that the opportunity is for real estate investors to embrace that the human experience of people, particularly in a multifamily, there are opportunities to engage in a lot of ways and promote a good quality of life. And I know that those are all very sort of qualitative things, but I think what you can do is you can show me your budget and you're putting some effort into it. That's the quantitative part. And the great thing is that these things are not expensive, and the benefits, are really outsized the inputs. So for example, pollinator gardens and things like this, there's not really much, if any, additional expense that's required. Every property in general is going to have a landscaping budget and a grounds maintenance budget and needs for, occasional capital improvements around landscaping. And it's really kind of managing on a portfolio level, it's managing those opportunities and encouraging that this gets included in how these projects are scoped and executed. And it's not enough kind of to say you're planting native plants or you're putting in pollinator friendly plant life, but really sort of building an amenity experience around that, meaning that there should be they should be done in a way that's visible, that has some sort of educational aspect to it through like signage. We use QR codes on signage to point to things like the kiosks for solar inverters and be able to kind of share that so people can look at it on their personal device. You can do the same sort of thing through spinning up small microsites or like putting it on the property website, what you're doing, why you're doing it. But, a place to sit, lighting, and inviting people to engage on it. And I think that, the technology aspect that's really exciting. I have a bird buddy in my backyard. Do you guys know what this is?
No.
So it's a bird feeder with an AI camera that's connected to my Wi-Fi, and I put the bird seed in there, and when a bird shows up, it pushes a photo to me. It tells me about the bird, that sort of thing. And the AI camera is so good at it now. You can name the birds like, this is Frank, this is Larry, this is and it's really engaging, really exciting. People look at the smiles that are just describing that.
It's called Bird Buddy.
Yeah, Bird Buddy is a good one, and they also are now
they're going to get them as a sponsor. They're getting a free plug here, so we're going to have to reach out.
They're doing a Kickstarter for another camera that is then more of like a wildlife type of cameras. Cool. This technology's been around for a while, but pointing it to kind of like these pollinator gardens and picking up the diversity that's coming from there. What's inherent in this is that you can begin to quantify that diversity. You can begin to track it over time. And I think that there is an opportunity for real estate investors, especially those that can begin to kind of baseline their impact and also think about how their operations are impacting the people and nature where they're at through things like ground maintenance and use of pesticides and that sort of thing.
You'll engage a
But, you know,
wider audience than reporting
yeah,
on your invisible gas emissions.
yeah.
It's joking, but it's real. People care about
People
nature.
like birds, people like butterflies, and
Yeah.
you kind of put that up front, and it's something that I think that you can kind of take two approaches. You can take a zero sum game approach to real estate investing, um, which I think is not a path towards, any sort of measurable success. I really think that people that kind of take that approach to their stewardship responsibility often find themselves in a mess in the short term. The economics, especially right now, you just can't ride cap rate compression to success. You need to really work at it. So, you know, the people that live in our buildings don't have any different needs, wants, or desires than I do. And, I know what brings me joy, and that's bird watching in my backyard.
It's very cool.
like it.
Let's hope some
Yeah.
of your peers pick up on the trend. Owen, I was gonna move to. We don't have much time left. Something related to his content on LinkedIn, but do you have something
Yeah.
maybe better to ask Thomas before I do that?
No. Yeah. Let's do it.
So Thomas, I am a fan of people being creative on social media, and especially in our world, as we talked about, timid and especially publicly traded large commercial real estate. Right? Everyone's got to be buttoned up and professional, but
Mhm.
this is 2025,
Yeah.
and elections are won on podcasts and memes. So
Mhm.
why can't we be communicating that way as a
Yeah.
commercial real estate industry? So it really caught my attention recently when you were doing the comic book thing.
Mhm.
I guess I got two questions. One, where does that come from? How do you do it? It's really cool. And two, can I make a request that when you post about this episode, you put Owen and I in a in a comic book asset?
Careful what you ask for, Jeff. Jeff, careful what you ask for. Um, I am really interested in what large language models and AI can do. So I'm somebody who's actively engaged in that and trying to innovate. Um, it's hard, so people that start technology companies, I have a lot of respect for. I have some friends in this area, and I try to keep my mind on how can I find a way to um, to kind of like bring some value out of this opportunity, because I think there is the rate that you know these AI models improve is, I don't think that people fundamentally understand that.
No, it's nuts.
But
Yeah.
you know, I so I asked ChatGPT to do a comic
So
based
I was wondering
on,
if this was prompted by AI. Okay,
yeah.
it's
But
really
I said
impressive
create an
what it pulled
image
off. Yeah.
of Andrew is our sustainability manager, and him and I were going to the Department of Energy's Better Building Summit in DC in June, and I wanted to just let people know we are going to be there. So I thought in my head, well, let's create an image of him and I kind of like in the plane. And so I put in, probably 25 words describing this, and I got like an amazing result. And if you've used image generation in the past, you know that it was at first very, very kind of like very weird, very,
Hallucinates. Yeah.
very hallucinatory kind of. And now the fidelity is amazing. And the fact that it also you can, it can kind of begin to preserve the integrity of the character and the story and that sort of thing. Like, I just from a price performance and kind of inputs, 1 minute and 25 words from me, and I can produce something that's super kind of like high quality, engaging. I
Yeah.
think it's a great example of there's opportunity for people to, um, use these tools. Maybe, you don't have to start, $1 billion unicorn company, but you can begin to tell, the story of the challenges that you face and the successes you have, and kind of begin to build that sort of engagement. In other ways, nobody wants to see a novel online,
Yeah.
So you really have to kind of like find a way to get people's attention, get to the point.
Stand out like you did.
stand out.
Yeah.
So I
don't
did
remember-
it. I'm having a birthday dinner for my husband on Saturday. So I did the same sort of images with him eating birthday cake and put that on the invitation.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
See, Owen, so I work for an AI-powered sustainability data analytics company. Owen's always making fun of me that
Here we go.
I don't provide the same impact to the built world as he does anymore. But see, Owen, Thomas is educating us.
So-
You got to be more AI forward.
Yeah. No,
There's
Thomas, I was
there's
just going to say, Joel and I are talking about launching a summit. Kind of learning from the conferences that we've gone to, what works, what doesn't work, what people are really interested in. And I was listening to a podcast the other day. We'll have to put it in the show notes, Joel. But now there's a new AI tool where you can take photos and it will stitch it into a video. So not just a comic book, but an. So Joel, I was thinking about that's how we can launch our summit. Just take a couple of videos, boom, AI trailer. So I'm starting to adopt it, Joel. I'm not a total hater anymore.
Well, Thomas, this has been fascinating. I'm learning from listening to you. I hope we can keep in touch.
I learned some things from both of you too. Don't worry.
Good. Well, we got to wrap up. I'm fairly certain you're going to have a solid answer to the last question. We often in this industry, or anyone who cares about the environment, can get caught up in negativity and bad news about what's happening. But we like to be optimistic here on the show. So tell us something that gives you hope for the future.
I think that what gives me the most hope is because I don't peg my outlook on any kind of discrete action headline take on something. What I look at is kind of, I follow the arc, and the long arc, how I look at the long arc is probably the next 5 and 10 years. If you want more optimism, look at the longer arc, look at the next 25 years. But the next 5 or 10 years are, the economics of energy, the scaling of, really remarkable technology, creates a really good place. I think that what that really requires is people to understand that the future is listening to them. So the things that you're doing and saying, what you're doing today is making the future. And so I follow that arc. It's kind of like my North Star of, the fundamentals of the transition to a low carbon economy. The economics make good sense. And it's really kind of like just getting yourself educated and understanding that on a fundamental level, and don't be so caught up in acrimony. And acrimony is super important, and it will exist in the next 10, 20 years because we don't need a benevolent, climate dictator. What we need are, 8 billion people, working and innovating and arguing to kind of get the best possible outcomes. And so, I think that the acrimony today and kind of like the controversy that people kind of like, get concerned about are sort of short-term things, but it's also a feature, not a bug. And it's a feature that gives me optimism. As long as people keep arguing, we're going to get to a better place.
What a great message.
Keep the arguing going. Love
Yeah,
it.
we couldn't agree more. Let's get it out in the open. Let's have tough conversations. Let's have real talk. And Thomas, we'll be rooting for you to keep doing what you're doing, posting content, being a voice of reason, educating the industry. So thank you for coming on. Thank you for all you do.
My pleasure.
Well, before we close, anyway, you want to plug Stoneweg website, Thomas on LinkedIn? What's the best way to follow Thomas's content?
I'd love people to take a look at the Stoneweg.us, STONE.us website. There's an ESG page, and there's a big picture of me if you want to cut and paste and put it into ChatGPT. Um,
That's gonna be the thumbnail of this episode for sure.
but connecting with me on LinkedIn and following me, I really, what I'm trying to do is be part of that conversation, and share my experience and kind of, build momentum, towards, greater efficiency and improved values and avoiding risks and just um, sharing experience so we can all do better.
Well said. Well, we'll wrap on that. Thank you, Owen. Thank you, Thomas. And thank you, everyone, for joining. You can also find Owen and I on LinkedIn, usually actively antagonizing the more talk, more complaining sustainability crowd. You can find this podcast and more great content at letstalkmoreaction.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe, like, and share with your friends. And until next time, we encourage you to ask yourself, what are you doing to take action to make the world a better place?